It's always a pleasure to welcome Sandy Stotsky back to the show. Dr. Stotsky, thank you for joining us again. It's good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
You have a really neat article in the New Boston Post, something that a lot of us have talked about, but I think you really crystallize it. How Common Core exams, these big standardized tests, these bureaucratic tests, how they are turning college kids into high school kids. Talk a little bit about your premise in the article.
The premise of my article is what is happening as the result of these tests and the kinds of test items that are on Common Core aligned tests. And it could be Common Core directly or Common Core as slightly revised, so it still is Common Core, even if people have given it different names. But it's a question of what are the effects on students in high schools, particularly because of the college readiness issue.
So again, talk a little bit about the tests for those people who aren't really up to speed on them. We know that since Common Core has been approved, the tests have been slowly morphing to become Common Core compliant. You are one of the foremost ELA specialists in the world. Talk about what these tests mean for readers, for young readers, and what kind of reading the kids are doing in school now.
The kind of reading they're doing is now less literary and more informational. That we know from some research-based sources. For example, last year, Fordham Institute did a study of what a sampled number of reading and English teachers were teaching. And we know that there is less literature being given or assigned to students and more informational materials. The informational materials I've commented on before. They are fragments from what might have been longer curricula in science or math or history, and they're loaded with vocabulary items that are discipline specific based on the subject matter that is in the so-called informational article. Aside from that, we know very little about these particular kinds of tests, these Common Core-based mandated state or federal tests, because we really don't know who is determining the test items. We don't know who is setting the cutoff score, the raw score for them. A lot is we're in the dark about a lot of aspects. If we're talking about ELA, and this is what I was focusing on in my article, for the most part, we don't even know what criteria are being used for choosing the passages.
Right. And, we talked about those informational texts. We're taking away literature, the great books of Western culture, the great ideas, the ideas that sort of undermine our democracy, undermine our republic, the ideas that give coherence to the culture and give us a common intellectual background with which to protect our freedoms. These are being replaced, as you said, by informational texts that are not only vocabulary specific and oftentimes just fragments of larger arguments taken out of context, but they're also very ideological, often very polemical, often very radical in their worldview. But going back to your article here, so how is it that the tests, because we don't know who's writing the tests, and we don't know what the tests are necessarily looking for, we know that the teachers themselves really aren't allowed to see the tests. So how are these tests then driving what happens in the high school and middle school classrooms? And how, by extension, is that turning these college kids really into high school readers?
Teachers are almost caught in a bind because they may be held accountable for kids' scores on these ELA as well as math tests that are given from grades 3 to 8 every year, and then once in high school. And the high school test is the one that really counts for college readiness. The earlier tests, we're not sure what they count for except for accountability for the teachers who are being held accountable for raising the scores of low-achieving or low-performing kids, when what the kids are doing on these tests is not really the teacher's fault, but the threat of these tests and the threat of accountability means that there's a lot of time spent on teaching to the test.
I see it every day in my classrooms. My college kids have about a ninth grade reading level. I mean, it's really low. I mentioned, I think before to you, Sandy, when I started teaching Shakespeare in college 25 years ago, I taught 13 plays a semester. I now can only get 4 or 5 in because I have to go so slow. In effect, I'm almost having to teach these college juniors and seniors how to read all over again before I can even get them to understand what Shakespeare's doing in 3 or 4 lines of poetry. Talk about what's going on with regards to how college kids, now we're seeing in college the consequence of this lower reading standards.
First, if you have a lower set of expectations in both math and reading, and then declare these kids ready for college after they take a test in grade 10 or 11 or 12, it depends on maybe the state or the community when they actually give the test. They go on to college, but their reading level has been lowered or they achieve a lower score because we don't know who is setting this cut score. And because they are then determined to be college ready, they go on to college courses where there has already been a signed agreement that goes back to the Race to the Top agreements a number of years ago, 2010, 2011, or around that time, when whatever states signed on to Common Core standards agreed to be part of the testing consortia that were to develop test items that would be based on Common Core standards. But it was never clear who exactly were the people who were going to decide on the cutoff score. So if the cutoff score is very low in high school, that means that lower achieving students are now going on to college. And the question is, what are they taking? They have been allowed to take for credit whatever their freshman courses are, because colleges, post-secondary institutions in general, signed on to say that they would not give them placement tests or developmental courses. I don't know what's happening in your university, but you might know about the developmental courses that they might have taken, the percentage. The effort was to get rid of a lot of those developmental courses, or remedial courses as they were often called. And then they have to be given credit for whatever they take. But if they don't have real college level skills and they have to be given credit and they have to be passed, which is another issue, then they're going to be taking courses that have less content in them and eventually graduating from college, having learned less, unless the college majors can figure out how to weed out, if possible, the lowest scoring students, although the effort now is being made to get everybody through college in 5 or 6 years at the latest, and then declare them college graduates. So you have a whole series of steps to getting more students graduating from college who have taken as freshmen and maybe sophomore these developmental courses, but for credit, not for remediation, non-credit.
That is exactly right. That's what we're seeing across the country and in my classrooms as well. What we've done is just like Common Core does, we have pitched the universities now not to make the best kids accelerate, but to make sure the lowest 20, 30% of kids who really ought not to be there, they're not prepared, either intellectually or emotionally to be there. Our focus now is keeping them. And what happens is that the kids who really can do college work are being artificially slowed down because our big concern is to keep that 30% of the bottom feeders in. And so I think that's very well said. And Sandy, before we sign off today, you've got a book coming out in the summer, August, that's going to deal with some of these issues. But tell us the name of your book, tell us the publisher, and tell us what we can expect to see in that book.
The book that will come out in August from Roman and Littlefield is about the roots of low achievement and where to begin altering them, because it is in some ways a follow-up to the book that I wrote and published last year in 2018, which was about the roots of low achievement. We have had in this country billions of dollars, as we all know, spent since 1965, since the first passage or authorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and this was under LBJ in 1965. And since then, we have had a lot of money dedicated or targeted to the lowest achievers in our schools, with the idea of getting more kids through and up and out. And the problem is that the research that I've been able to look at, including preschool programs, after-school programs, it doesn't matter what the program is, it's very difficult to find any silver bullet that has made lower achievers higher achievers.